cloud were the Wieners, a Jewish couple vividly captured as the Rosens in Old Mrs. Harris, whose paintings and library and collection of Victrola records were a first taste of contemporary arts and letters. There was William Ducker, a store clerk with whom Willa studied Latin and Greek, advancing far enough to read Homer, Virgil, and Ovid. More profoundly, there were Swedes, Czechs, Norwegians, Russians, French-Canadians, Mexicans, and more on the sparsely settled plains. She heard a babble of languages and observed ways of life very different from her own. These deep influences made her a cosmopolitan while she was still a provincial. They seem one key to her deeper theme, the nation as a gathering of peoples from elsewhere, adding Americanness to some earlier identity, as in her favorite book, The Aeneid. Aeneas founds Rome, thereby adding an Italic identity to his Trojan origins, as she herself added a Midwestern identity to the Virginian self she began with. I find this grafting of later onto earlier the central trope in her work, and the transformations of westwardness and escape from old trammels, her chief theme. As she puts it in the Song of the Lark, the United States is a place where refugees from old, sad countries were given another chance. Her books are, in effect, a critique of Frederick Jackson Turner's famous and outmoded frontier thesis. Turner has little to say about the disproportionate number of immigrants defining the westward movement of the nation. What sets her apart from her younger contemporaries, Hemingway, Faulkner, Fitzgerald, Dos Passos, is that this idealism about American possibility was unironic. What makes her the greatest of anti-modernists is that ideals were what were most real to her. In the Song of the Lark, she calls them instinctive standards for which one is bound to suffer. Compare the authors of The Sun Also Rises, The Sound and the Fury, The Great Gatsby, and Manhattan Transfer, men who wrote mockingly about the illusoriness and deceptiveness of ideals. To Alfred Knopf, she would declare in 1932, "If all the great loyalties are utter lies, why then they are ever so much better than the truth. And that is what brought ideals out of the dung heap in the first place, because creatures weren't content with dung, though it is always there, and in a sense more real." All my stories, she told a Nebraska journalist, have been written with the material that was gathered, no, God save us, not gathered, but absorbed, before I was 15 years old. There's truth in this, of course. Temperament is established early and does not change. But what is most striking about Cather's life is the catalytic role of experience on temperament. It was an ever-expanding knowledge of the world that would propel her to greatness. At 25, she spent an unforgettable week in New York, visiting museums and galleries, attending the Metropolitan Opera, writing reviews of plays for the New York Sun, lunching with Helena Modjeska, the great Polish actress. At 29, she visited Europe for the first time, London and the west of England, Paris, Marseille, the cities and towns of Provence. Momentous, yes, but of still greater import would be a 1912 journey to Winslow, Arizona, to visit her brother Douglas. She was captured for good and all by the harsh beauty of the Southwest, hard bit by new ideas, she called it, in a letter to her young friend, Elizabeth Shepley Sargent. It seemed to her the landscape of an inner life hitherto unknown. Here she first became aware of 11th and 12th century Anasazi ruins honeycombing the canyons and mesas. As she writes to S.S. McClure, "I feel as if my mind had been freshly washed and ironed and were ready for a new life." 3 years later, she returned to the Southwest with Edith Lewis, the companion with whom she'd spent close on half a century, for an ecstatic summer-long stay. Happiness is something one can't explain, Tom Outland will say in The Professor's House, remembering his months on the Mesa. Troubles enough came afterward, but there was that summer, high and blue, a life in itself. In addition to Mesa Verde, her inspiration for the Tom Outland inset, a glorious novella in its own right, they visited Taos and Santa Fe, both of which would prove crucial to her later work.